The fork didn't just hit the plate. It hit every lie my parents ever told. When my billionaire grandmother asked if I was still living in the house she bought me, my brain short-circuited because I was sleeping next to a space heater in a roach-infested basement. By the time dessert should have been served, my parents had lost a lake house and their inheritance. If you have ever wondered what happens when the poor daughter finally stops playing along, stay with me until the end. My name is Camilla Wagner, and at this exact moment, I was trying to make myself invisible while sitting on a velvet chair that cost more than my entire life savings. The dining room of my parents' estate in Evergreen Ridge smelled of roasted rosemary, expensive beeswax candles, and the heavy, suffocating scent of old money. Outside, the wind was howling through the manicured pines, whipping the snow into a frenzy. But inside, the thermostat was set to a perfect 72 degrees. It was warm enough that my mother was wearing a sleeveless silk gown, her skin glowing under the golden light of the crystal chandelier. I, on the other hand, was sweating. But not because of the heat. I was sweating because I was wearing a thick, scratchy wool sweater over a thermal shirt, tucked into pants that I had bought from a Goodwill bin 3 years ago. I had arrived in a coat I picked up for $9 at a Salvation Army, a shapeless gray thing that smelled faintly of mothballs and someone else's cigarettes. When I walked in the door 20 minutes ago, my mother, Denise, had looked at it as if I were holding a dead rat. She had snatched it from my shoulders with 2 fingers, holding it at arm's length before stuffing it deep into the coat closet, behind her fur wraps, ensuring no one would see it. "You look healthy, Camilla," my father, Victor, had said when I sat down. It was his code word for unkempt. He was sitting across from me now, cutting into his prime rib with the precision of a surgeon. He was wearing a bespoke suit, the fabric dark and rich, his cufflinks catching the light every time he moved his hand. "We were worried you wouldn't make it. The storm is getting terrible out there." "The buses were running slow," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on my plate. I did not mention that the bus had actually stopped running 2 miles away because the drivers refused to navigate the steep, icy hills of the private estate roads. I did not mention that I had walked the rest of the way, wrapping plastic bags over my socks inside my worn-out boots to keep my toes from freezing. "Buses," my mother laughed, a tinkling, artificial sound. She turned her beaming smile toward the head of the table. "Camilla is so quaint with her eco-friendly choices, isn't she, Mother? Always trying to save the planet." At the head of the table sat the only person in this room who made my heart feel something other than anxiety. Eleanor Price, my grandmother. She was 78 years old, but she had the posture of a general. She had built a shipping and logistics empire from the ground up, sold it for billions, and now spent her retirement judging the world over the rim of her reading glasses. She was wearing a simple navy blazer, no jewelry except for her wedding band, yet she looked more expensive than my parents combined. She was not smiling at my mother. She was looking at me. Her eyes, usually sharp enough to cut glass, were soft, worried. "You look tired." "Camilla," Eleanor said. Her voice was low, raspy from years of commanding boardrooms. "Are you eating enough?" My stomach gave a violent lurch. I was starving. I had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. My budget for the week was down to $12, and I had spent 4 of it on a box of granola bars to survive until payday. The smell of the prime rib, the truffle mashed potatoes, and the glazed carrots was making me dizzy. "I am fine, Grandma," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Just working a lot. The dental office is busy during the holidays." "And the design classes?" Eleanor asked, taking a sip of her red wine. "How is school?" I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. I had never enrolled in the design classes. I couldn't. I had applied to the prestigious design school 2 years ago. But when the tuition bill came, my father told me the family was illiquid at the moment and that I needed to be patient. "It is going great," I said, the lie tasting like bile in my throat. "Really challenging." Victor cleared his throat loudly, sensing the danger. He immediately launched into a monologue designed to pull the attention back to him. Speaking of challenges, Eleanor, you should see the plans for the new wing we are adding to the house. Denise has been working with the architects day and night. We are thinking of a solarium, importing the glass from Italy. And the charity gala, Denise interrupted, leaning forward, her diamond earrings swinging. Mother, we are on track to raise $200,000 for the local art museum. Everyone is so impressed with how much Victor and I have contributed this year. I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were red and dry. The skin cracked from the harsh soap at the diner where I worked my second job. I scrubbed dishes from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, standing on concrete floors that made my knees ache. My parents were talking about Italian glass and art museums while I was worried about whether I had enough propane left in the portable heater to get me through the night. My apartment, if you could call it that, was a converted storage room in the basement of a crumbling house on Oakwood Avenue. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained. The floor was permanently damp. There were cockroaches that I had named because they were my only roommates. I paid $800 a month for the privilege of inhaling black mold, and even that was a struggle to scrape together. I looked around the table, the crystal goblets, the heavy silver cutlery, the warmth. It felt like a stage set, a play where everyone knew their lines except me. I was the prop, the daughter they trotted out to look like a happy family, while they spent the inheritance that was supposed to secure my future. "This wine is exquisite, Victor," Eleanor said, though her tone was hard to read. 1996 vintage, Victor beamed, puffing out his chest. "I bought 2 cases, only the best for you, Mother." I cut a piece of meat and put it in my mouth, chewing mechanically. I just wanted this to be over. I wanted to fill my stomach, grab my coat from the closet, and disappear back into the night. I would suffer through the walk back to the bus stop. I would endure the cold. I just needed to survive the next hour without screaming. Then, the music stopped. The playlist my mother had curated faded out between tracks, and for a second, the room was perfectly silent. Eleanor set her wineglass down. It made a sharp, deliberate sound against the polished mahogany table. She did not pick up her fork again. She folded her hands in front of her and looked directly at me. "Camilla," she said. Her voice was different this time. It was not the soft voice of a grandmother concerned about my weight. It was the voice of the CEO who had crushed competitors and negotiated hostile takeovers. It was a voice that demanded absolute truth. I looked up, swallowing hard. "Yes, Grandma?" "I was looking at the photos your mother sent me last month," she said. Her eyes locked on mine. "The ones of the renovations." Victor stopped chewing. Denise froze, her wineglass halfway to her lips. "The new kitchen looks lovely," Eleanor continued, her gaze never wavering from my face. "The granite countertops, the skylights. It looks like a wonderful place to start your life." I frowned, confused. I didn't know what she was talking about. I hadn't seen any photos. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Camilla, tell me, are you still living in the house I bought you?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Time seemed to warp. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly sounded like gunshots. Tick, tick, tick. My heart hammered against my ribs, hard enough that I thought it might bruise the bone. My hands went numb. The blood drained from my face, leaving me lightheaded. The house she bought me. I looked at my father. Victor's face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open. He dropped his fork. It clattered onto the china, a harsh, jagged noise that made Denise flinch. I looked at my mother. Denise was staring at me, her eyes wide and manic. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, her lips pressed together in a desperate line. The message was clear. It was the same message I had received my entire life. Protect us. Lie for us. Don't you dare ruin this. For 20 years, I had played this game. I had nodded when they said we were summering in the Hamptons, while we actually stayed in a motel. I had smiled when they told people I was finding myself, instead of admitting I couldn't afford college. I had been the silent accomplice to their vanity. But then I thought about the draft in my basement. I thought about the bucket I had to empty every morning because the pipe above my bed dripped brown water. I thought about the nights I lay awake shivering, wearing 3 pairs of socks, wondering why my grandmother, the billionaire, never sent more than a card. I looked at Eleanor. She was waiting. She wasn't looking at me with judgment. She was looking at me with an intensity that suggested she already knew the answer. But she needed to hear me say it. She needed me to break the chain. The silence stretched out, agonizing and thick. Victor reached for his wine glass, his hand trembling so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like blood. "Camilla," Denise hissed, her voice a forced, high-pitched giggle. "Don't be shy. Darling, tell Grandma how much you love the cottage. Tell her about the garden." I looked at my mother's desperate, painted face. I looked at the $9 coat hidden in the closet. I looked at the lie that had been my life. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like a thread finally giving way under too much weight. I put my fork down. I placed my hands on the table to stop them from shaking. I took a breath that smelled of pine and expensive roast beef, and I exhaled the fear. "I do not have a house, Grandma," I said. My voice was steady. It was the only steady thing in the room. Denise gasped. Victor closed his eyes as if he had been struck physically. "What?" Eleanor asked softly. "I am currently renting a 300-square-foot basement on Oakwood Avenue," I said, the words pouring out now, unstoppable. "I sleep next to a space heater because the central heat does not work. I have never had a house. I have never seen a deed. I have never signed any papers." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had detonated but hadn't yet destroyed the building. Eleanor did not look shocked. She did not scream. Instead, a terrifying calmness settled over her features. She turned her head very slowly to the right, shifting her gaze from me to my father. It was a predator looking at prey. "Victor," she said, her voice dropped an octave, cold enough to freeze the water in the glasses. "If Camilla is living in a basement, then I have a question for you." She picked up her napkin and dabbed the corner of her mouth, never breaking eye contact with him. "Where," she asked, articulating every syllable with lethal precision, "did the $450,000 I sent you to buy it go?" To understand why the silence in that dining room felt heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us, you have to understand the theater production that was my childhood. Growing up, the Wagner household operated under a single, unwritten constitution. The truth did not matter. Facts were flexible, negotiable inconveniences. The only thing that held any currency was the image. If it looked perfect on a holiday card, or if it garnered more than 100 likes on social media, then it was real. Everything else, our debts, the cold silences, the fact that my father had not actually gone to an office in a decade, was just static to be tuned out. My father, Victor, was the lead actor in this tragedy. He was a man who wore Italian wool suits to eat breakfast cereal. He spent his days pacing the hardwood floors of his study, barking into a phone headset about mergers and acquisitions and liquidity events. As a child, I thought he was a titan of industry. It was only when I got older that I realized most of those calls were to his golf buddies, or worse, to the automated customer service line of his credit card company, negotiating for an extension on his limit. He played the role of the exhausted provider so well that I felt guilty for existing, for consuming resources, for needing new shoes. I did not know then that the suit he wore was paid for by the dividends of a trust fund my grandmother had set up for me before I could walk. Then there was my mother, Denise. She was the director, the stage manager, and the harshest critic to the outside world. She was a philanthropist and a devoted mother. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of beige linen, fresh-cut hydrangeas, and soft-focus selfies, but I was the prop that never quite fit the set design. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the foyer before a dinner party. My mother had dressed me in a stiff, lace-collared dress that scratched my neck. She knelt in front of me, fixing a bow in my hair, her grip tight enough to pull my scalp. "Smile, Camila," she had hissed, her teeth clenched behind a glossy pink smile. "And for heaven's sake, do not talk about your drawing obsession. Nobody wants to hear about your little sketches. Just sit there and look grateful." I was never pretty enough, never sparkling enough. I was a quiet child who liked to draw floor plans and rearrange the furniture in my dollhouse. My mother called me her little project in public, but in private, she looked at me with a mixture of boredom and irritation. I was a stain in her perfect frame, a smudge on the lens that she could not quite edit out. The only person who seemed to see me was Eleanor, my grandmother. But Eleanor was a myth, a distant deity who lived on another continent. She spent her time in London, or Zurich, or on a yacht in the Mediterranean. She was the goddess of fortune who occasionally descended to bestow gifts upon us. Throughout my childhood, heavy cream-colored envelopes would arrive in the mail. They smelled of lavender and expensive paper. My father would always intercept the mail, but he would hand me the card eventually, inside, in shaky but elegant cursive. Eleanor would write things like, "My dearest Camilla, thinking of you on your birthday. I have sent a little something to your parents to deposit for you. Buy yourself something that makes your heart sing." I would hold those cards, looking for a check, a bill, anything. There was never anything inside, just the paper. When I was 10, I finally gathered the courage to ask. We were in the kitchen, and my mother was arranging imported tulips in a vase that cost more than a used car. "Mom," I asked, holding the card. "Grandma says she sent money. Where is it?" Denise did not even look up from the flowers. She laughed, a dry, pitying sound. "Oh, honey, you know how your grandmother is. She is getting old. She gets confused. She probably thought she wrote a check, or maybe she meant she put it in a savings bond you can't touch for 50 years. But she says it every time," I insisted. My mother spun around, her face hardening. "Do not be greedy. Camilla, it is unbecoming. Your grandmother has done enough for this family. Do not ever embarrass her by asking about money. If she forgot, she forgot. We do not mention it. Do you understand?" I nodded, feeling a hot flush of shame. I learned the lesson well. Grandma was senile. Grandma was forgetful. And I was not important enough for her to remember the check. It made sense to me. Why would the billionaire CEO remember a mousy little girl in the suburbs? So, I stopped asking. I let my parents intercept the little somethings. I let them cash the checks that I now know were $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Money meant for art supplies, for summer camps, for joy. The deception grew grander as the stakes got higher. When I graduated high school, my dream was to go to the Rhode Island School of Design. I had the portfolio. I had the acceptance letter. I remember running into the living room, waving the thick envelope, my heart feeling like it was going to burst with happiness. Victor was sitting on the leather sofa, swirling a glass of scotch. He took the letter, read it, and then sighed the sigh of a martyr carrying the weight of the world. "Camilla," he said, his voice heavy with fake regret. "We are so proud of you, really, but you have to be realistic. The markets have been brutal this year. Our liquidity is tied up." "But Grandma," I started. "Your grandmother helps where she can." He cut me off. "But we cannot ask her for tuition. That is hundreds of thousands of dollars. We simply do not have it. The community college has a perfectly adequate general arts program. You can transfer later, when things stabilize." I crushed the acceptance letter in my hand. I spent the next 2 years taking general education classes I hated, driving a rusted sedan to a campus that smelled of floor wax and despair. I told myself I was being a good daughter. I was helping the family tighten its belt. Meanwhile, Eleanor believed she had paid my full tuition for 4 years at the prestigious design school. She thought the photos my parents sent her of me standing in front of brick buildings were from Rhode Island, not the local library downtown where my mother made me pose. The cracks in my reality should have been obvious, but when you are raised in a hall of mirrors, you lose your sense of direction. The moment that truly broke me, though, happened 3 years ago. It was a Tuesday in November. I was driving my 20-year-old car to my evening shift at the diner. It was raining. A cold, freezing rain that turned the roads into slicks of oil and ice. The engine sputtered and died on the highway shoulder. I was stranded 5 miles from home. I had no roadside assistance plan because I couldn't afford the extra $12 a month, shivering, with semi-trucks blasting past me and shaking the entire car. I called my father. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "The car died. I'm stuck on I-90. Can you come get me? Or call a tow truck?" There was a pause on the line. I could hear the television in the background. "Camilla," Victor said, his tone lecturing. "We talked about this. You are an adult now. Part of being an adult is managing your own logistics. If I come save you every time you have a hiccup, you will never learn resilience." "Dad, it is freezing rain," I pleaded. "I don't have enough money for a tow." "Then you better figure it out," he said. "Call a friend, walk to a gas station, build some character." He hung up. I sat there in the dark, crying hot, angry tears that fogged up the windows. I eventually walked 2 miles to a service station, ruined my shoes, and begged the mechanic to let me pay him next week. While I was sitting in that mechanic's waiting room, smelling like wet wool and exhaust, I pulled out my phone to distract myself. I opened Instagram. There, at the top of my feed, was a post from Denise posted 10 minutes ago. It was a photo of a handbag, a structured, cream-colored designer bag sitting on her lap in the passenger seat of their Range Rover. The caption read, "Sometimes a girl just needs to treat herself. New baby joining the collection. Self-care. Blessed." I knew that bag. I knew the brand. I knew the price because I studied design. That bag cost $1,500. $1,500. My father had just told me they couldn't afford a tow truck. He had lectured me on resilience while I was stranded on a highway. And at that exact same moment, my mother was unboxing a purse that cost 3 months of my rent. That was the moment the sadness turned into something else. It turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But even then, I didn't know the full extent of it. I thought they were just selfish. I thought they were bad with money and prioritizing their image over my safety. I did not know that the $1,500 for that bag likely came from a transfer my grandmother had sent specifically for Camilla's car maintenance fund. I did not know that the heating bill for the pool where my father floated every afternoon was being paid by the dividends of stocks listed in my name. I sat in that mechanic's shop, shivering, believing I was poor, believing I was the failure who couldn't make ends meet. I scolded myself for being envious of my own mother. "You are just ungrateful," I told myself. "They put a roof over your head for 18 years. Stop complaining." So I swallowed the anger. I bottled it up and shoved it down deep, right next to the hunger and the shame. I continued to play the role of the struggling artist's daughter, the one who just wasn't smart enough to make it big. I didn't know that while I was eating instant noodles in a basement, my parents were drinking my future, one vintage bottle of wine at a time. But tonight, at this Christmas dinner, looking at the terror in Victor's eyes and the trembling hands of my mother, I realized something. The play was over. The curtain had been ripped down, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who had forgotten my lines. To understand the sheer violence of that question, you have to understand where I had been just 4 hours earlier. My life was measured in shifts, from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I was the smiling face at Bright Hollow Dental, answering phones and filing insurance claims for $14 an hour, from 5 in the evening until midnight. I was the waitress at the Midnight Fork Diner, smelling like old fryer grease and cheap coffee, praying for tips that usually never came. Between the 2 jobs, I cleared maybe $2,200 a month, and almost half of that went to the hole in the ground I called home. My apartment was a basement studio on the wrong side of town. It was not a cozy lower-level suite, as the listing had promised. It was a concrete box with a ceiling that peeled like sunburned skin. Directly above my bed, a rusted pipe sweated condensation that dripped with a rhythmic, torturous consistency. Plip, plip, plip. I had placed a red plastic bucket underneath it, and that sound had become the metronome of my insomnia. The landlord, A man who smoked cigars that smelled like burning tires, refused to fix the central heating. He claimed it was user error, that the vents blew out air that was somehow colder than the temperature outside. So, I lived next to a space heater I bought at a garage sale. It was an ancient, rattling thing with a frayed cord that sparked if you looked at it wrong. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I woke up seeing my own breath. The room was 42 degrees. I was wearing 2 pairs of leggings, a thermal shirt, a hoodie, and a beanie hat pulled down over my ears. I lay there for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of a country that didn't exist, and I debated simply not moving. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Grandma Eleanor is waiting. Don't make her sad. Be here by 6. Try to look presentable." It was a masterclass in passive aggression. No Merry Christmas, no we love you, just a command wrapped in guilt. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the delete button. I did not want to go. I did not want to sit in their mansion and feel small. I did not want to watch them open gifts that cost more than my annual rent. But then my stomach growled. It was a deep, painful, hollow sound. I had eaten instant oatmeal for dinner 3 nights in a row. The thought of my mother's roast turkey, the garlic mashed potatoes, and the warm gravy made my mouth water. I was not going for the family. I was going for the protein. I dragged myself out of bed. I showered in lukewarm water because the water heater was just as reliable as the furnace. When it came time to dress, I put on my best sweater, the scratchy wool one, and pulled on my boots. They were scuffed at the toes, the leather peeling away to reveal the cardboard structure underneath. Then came the coat. It was a heavy gray wool coat I had found at a thrift store for $9. It was oversized, slightly shapeless, and missing the bottom button. But it was warm. It was the only thing standing between me and the blizzard outside. My mother hated it. She called it my homeless coat. She once told me it smelled like failure. I put it on, buttoned it to my chin, and walked out into the biting wind. Getting to Evergreen Ridge without a car was a logistical nightmare. The city buses did not service the wealthy gated communities. The city planners apparently assumed that if you lived there, you drove a Mercedes, and if you worked there, you were the help who had your own transport. I took the number 12 bus to the end of the line, then transferred to the number 45, which dropped me off at the edge of the affluent district. From there, it was a 1.5 mile walk uphill. The snow was coming down in thick, wet sheets. The wind whipped against my face, stinging my cheeks. I trudged along the perfectly plowed roads of Evergreen Ridge, watching the houses get bigger and bigger, massive iron gates, driveways the size of highways, windows glowing with the golden light of 12-foot Christmas trees. By the time I reached my parents' driveway, my feet were numb. I could not feel my toes. My nose was running, and my hair was plastered to my forehead. I rang the doorbell, shivering violently. Denise opened the door. She was wearing a silk dress the color of champagne. Her hair was a perfect, immobile helmet of blonde highlights. She looked at me, and her lip curled slightly. It was a reflex she couldn't control. "Jesus, Camilla," she said, ushering me inside quickly as if I were a stray dog she didn't want the neighbors to see. "You look like you dragged the entire free clinic in here with you." "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said, my teeth chattering. She didn't hug me. She pointed a manicured finger at my coat. "Take that thing off immediately. It smells like wet animal. Put it in the back of the closet, way back. I don't want the guests smelling it." I peeled off the coat. Underneath, I was still cold, but the house was aggressively warm. It smelled of cinnamon, expensive red wine, and roasting meat. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of money. I walked into the living room, trying to smooth down my frizzy hair. The room was a masterpiece of superficiality. The tree touched the vaulted ceiling, decorated entirely in white and gold ornaments. There were piles of gifts wrapped in foil paper that shimmered under the recessed lighting. "Camilla!" Eleanor was sitting in a wingback chair by the fireplace. She stood up, leaning heavily on her cane, and held out her arms. I went to her, and she hugged me. It wasn't the polite, air kiss embrace my mother gave. It was a real hug. She held me tight, her hands patting my back. She smelled of lavender and old paper. She pulled back and held me at arm's length, her sharp blue eyes scanning my face. "You are thin," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Too thin. Are you eating, child?" My instinct was to tell her the truth, to tell her about the oatmeal, to tell her about the diner food I couldn't afford to buy even with my employee discount. But then I saw Victor watching us from the bar cart. His eyes narrowed in warning. "I am fine, Grandma," I lied. "Just working a lot, double shifts at the clinic." "Hard work is good," she said, though she didn't look convinced. "But you need sustenance." We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the pieces with the gold rim that we were never allowed to touch as children. I sat in my usual spot, the one furthest from the head of the table where Eleanor sat. Dinner began, and with it, the performance. My parents were in rare form. They treated the conversation like a tennis match, where the goal was to hit the ball of success as hard as possible. "We are thinking of expanding the patio next spring," Victor said, pouring more wine. "The contractor says he can import the limestone from France. It will match the aesthetic of the new club membership perfectly." "And the Costa Rica retreat," Denise added, picking at her salad. "Mother, you must come with us next year. It is a spiritual awakening, $4,000 a week, but the yoga instructors are world-class. It really centers you." I ate silently. I focused on the turkey. It was dry, but it was hot. I ate the potatoes. I ate the beans. I tried to fill the hollow space in my stomach before the inevitable criticism started. Then Victor decided to use me as a prop. "Camilla has been doing so well. Haven't you, honey?" he boomed, his face flushed with wine. He turned to Eleanor. "You know, Mother, we were worried about her for a while. She seemed so lost. But ever since she moved into that house you bought her, she has really turned a corner." I choked slightly on a piece of carrot. I kept my head down, praying he would stop. "It is true," Denise chimed in, her voice dripping with fake pride. "Homeownership really grounds a person. She is much more responsible now. She is decorating it beautifully, very minimalist." "Minimalist," Victor agreed. "She is finally understanding the value of assets. We are very proud." They were lying. They were lying effortlessly, weaving a tapestry of bullshit to cover the fact that they had stolen the money meant for my stability. They needed Eleanor to believe I was happy, secure, and thriving, so she wouldn't look too closely at the bank statements. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. It wasn't the food, it was the audacity. They were sitting there, eating prime rib, talking about French limestone. While I had walked through a blizzard in a $9 coat to get here, they were using my imaginary happiness to secure their next inheritance check. That was when the air in the room changed. Eleanor had been listening quietly, nodding occasionally, but now, she stopped. She set her crystal wine glass down on the table with a deliberate, sharp clink. She turned her head. She looked past Victor. She looked past Denise. She looked straight at me. Her eyes were not the soft eyes of the grandmother who had hugged me earlier. They were the eyes of the woman who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts. They were clear, cold, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Camilla," she said. The table went silent. "I was wondering," she continued, her voice level and calm, contrasting violently with the chaos that was about to erupt in my chest. "Are you still living in the house I bought you?" The question hung there. It was specific. It was direct. It was a trap. I looked at Victor. He had stopped chewing. His fork was frozen halfway to his mouth. I looked at Denise. Her smile was plastered on, but her eyes were screaming at me. "Lie." They said, "Lie or we destroy you." But I couldn't breathe. I thought of the red bucket. I thought of the ice on the inside of my window. I thought of the way Denise had looked at my coat. I was 24 years old. I was working 2 jobs. I was starving, and I was done. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. "Well?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward slightly. I took a deep breath. It felt like inhaling broken glass. I looked at my grandmother, and for the first time in my life, I decided to let the truth take a seat at the table. The silence that followed my confession was not empty, it was heavy, vibrating with the sudden, violent death of a 20-year charade. Victor was the first to react. He let out a laugh. It was a loud, booming sound that bounced off the vaulted ceilings, but it lacked any genuine humor. It sounded like a car engine trying to turn over in sub-zero temperatures. "Oh, Camila," he said, wiping the corner of his mouth with his linen napkin, his eyes darting frantically toward Eleanor. "You have such a dark sense of humor. She gets this from you, Mother, always so dramatic." He turned to me, his smile fixed and terrifyingly rigid. "Tell your grandmother you are joking, honey. It is not funny to worry her like that." I sat with my hands folded in my lap. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my voice remained strangely steady. "I am not joking." Denise jumped in then. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight, her face contorted into a mask of pitying condescension. She spoke to Eleanor as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Mother, you have to understand," Denise said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Camila is, well, she is confused about the legalities. She is very humble, too humble, really. The house is held in a trust. You see, technically, the trust owns it. So in her mind, she doesn't own it. She thinks she is renting because we handle the administrative fees." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Camila, darling, do not bore Grandma with your little misunderstandings about property law. It is all taken care of." Eleanor did not look at Denise. She did not look at Victor. She was still looking at me. She had not blinked. "Camila," Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through my mother's babbling like a scalpel. "I have 3 questions for you. I want yes or no answers. Can you do that for me?" I nodded. "Yes." "Do you have a set of keys to a house at 14 Silver Birch Lane?" "No," I said. "Do you know the alarm code for that property?" "No." "Have you ever signed a deed, a title transfer, or any document regarding a property in this county?" "No." Eleanor slowly turned her head toward my father. The movement was mechanical. "Victor, that sounds remarkably unlike a misunderstanding. That sounds like my granddaughter has no idea she owns a home." Victor spluttered, knocking his silverware against his plate. "Well, obviously we kept the paperwork from her for now. She is young. She is not ready for the burden of property taxes and maintenance. We are shielding her." "Shielding her," Eleanor repeated flatly. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen a few times, her movements precise, before sliding the phone across the polished mahogany table. It spun slowly and came to a stop in front of me. "Look at that! Camila!" she commanded. I looked down. On the screen was a photograph. It showed me standing in front of a charming, slate-gray cottage with a view of a frozen lake in the background. I was smiling, wearing a thick winter scarf. The caption underneath read, "Camila in front of her new place. Thank you so much. Mom, she is so happy." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I remember this," I whispered. "This was 4 years ago. We were on vacation at Lake Geneva. I had food poisoning that day. Mom made me stand outside for 20 minutes to get the lighting right for a family photo." "A family photo," Eleanor said, her voice rising slightly. "Denise sent me that photo 3 weeks after I wired the money. She told me it was the closing day." Denise let out a strangled sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I meant it was a representation, a visualization of what we were looking for." Eleanor ignored her. She tapped the phone screen again, bringing up an email. She picked up the device and began to read aloud. Her voice was devoid of emotion, which made the words sound even more damning. Subject: Update on Camilla's house. Date: August 14th, 2020. Dearest Mother, thank you so much for the additional $60,000. The kitchen renovation is complete, and the roof repairs are done. Camilla is absolutely thrilled with her new chef's kitchen. She says it is the perfect place to start her adult life. Love, Denise. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside the frosted windows. I looked at my hands. I thought about my kitchen. I thought about the hot plate I used to boil water for my tea. I thought about the mini fridge that hummed loudly and barely kept my milk cold. Chef's kitchen. $60,000, I whispered. You told me you couldn't afford to help me fix my radiator. Victor stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. He looked cornered. His face was a blotchy red, sweat beading on his forehead. It was an investment, he shouted, abandoning the joking pretense. You don't understand, Eleanor. The market is volatile. If we had just handed that cash to a 20-year-old, she would have blown it. We put it into the general family fund. We leveraged it. We are keeping it safe for her future. Safe? Eleanor asked, her eyebrows raising. In whose account? Victor? Yours? Or the offshore account you think I don't know about? We did it for her, Denise shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. The wine in her glass sloshed onto the tablecloth. She turned on me, her eyes wild with panic and rage. Look at her. Mother, look at her. She's wearing a coat from a garbage bin. She drives a car that barely runs. She can't even manage to keep a receptionist job without complaining about the hours. I work 2 jobs, Mom, I said, my voice shaking. You are irresponsible, Denise screamed, her composure shattering completely. If we gave you that money, you would have wasted it on art supplies, on nonsense. We sacrificed to manage that capital. We took on the burden of investing it so that one day, when you actually grow up, you might have something. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a quiet snap this time. It was an explosion. I stood up. I was trembling, but not from cold. Sacrificed? I asked. My voice was loud now, filling the cavernous dining room. You sacrificed? I walked here. I walked 1.5 miles in the snow because I couldn't afford a cab. I am wearing this sweater because my apartment is 40 degrees inside. I taped plastic over my windows last night to keep the wind out. I pointed a finger at Victor. You told me we were broke when I got into design school. You told me to learn resilience while you were buying a Porsche with my tuition money. I turned to Denise. And you? You told me I was a failure because I couldn't afford new shoes, while you were writing thank you notes for renovations that never happened. We are your parents, Victor bellowed, puffing out his chest as if his biological status granted him immunity from theft. Everything we have is technically yours eventually. You are being ungrateful. You are ruining Christmas over accounting. It is not accounting, I yelled back, tears finally spilling over. It is my life. It is the fact that I have been hungry for 3 years while you renovated your guest house. It is the fact that you looked at me in my $9 coat and felt ashamed of me, when you are the ones who put me in it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, an old model with a cracked screen. I slammed it on the table next to Eleanor's sleek device. You want to see where I live? I asked, looking at my grandmother. You want to see the chef's kitchen? I tapped the gallery. I swiped to a video I had taken last week to send to the landlord as proof of the leak. It showed the dark, cramped room, the peeling paint, the red bucket with brown water dripping into it. Plip, plip. The sound played tinny and small in the luxurious room. Eleanor watched the video. She watched the camera pan to my mattress on the floor, the stack of blankets, the space heater glowing ominously in the corner. When the video ended, Eleanor stood up. She did not move quickly. She moved with the slow, terrifying gravity of a glacier calving into the sea. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She was shaking. For the first time, I saw that she was not just a powerful CEO. She was an old woman who was heartbroken, and her heartbreak was rapidly calcifying into a rage that could level cities. Victor, she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried more weight than his shouting ever could. Call a taxi. Now, Mother, let's be reasonable, Victor started, holding up his hands. We can sit down. We can open the books. I can explain the strategy. I said call a taxi, Eleanor roared. The sound was so unexpected, so powerful. that Victor actually took a step back. "Where are you going?" Denise whimpered, her face pale. "Dessert is almost ready. The chef made your favorite soufflé." Eleanor turned to me. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was dry and cool, but her grip was iron. "I am going with Camilla," Eleanor said. "You can't," Denise cried. "To that dungeon? It is not safe. It is filthy. You are 78 years old. Mother!" Eleanor looked at her daughter with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the wine in the glasses. "Con will take me to where she lives," Eleanor declared. "If that basement is good enough for my granddaughter to live in for 3 years, then it is certainly good enough for me to visit." "This is insane," Victor shouted. "It is a performance. You are being manipulated by her. She is doing this to hurt us." "She is not the one who hurt this family." "Victor," Eleanor spat. She turned to me. "Get your coat. Camilla." "But Grandma," I stammered, looking at the snow swirling outside the window. "It is really bad out there, and the apartment. There is no chair for you. The heat barely works." "I have a fur coat," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "And I have lived through worse than a cold room. I have not, however, lived through the shame of dining with thieves." She began to walk toward the hallway. I stood there for a second, stunned, before scrambling to follow her. "Camilla!" Denise screamed after me. "If you walk out that door, you are destroying this family. You are ruining everything. Over money. Filthy money." I stopped at the closet. I opened the door and shoved past my mother's mink stoles and my father's cashmere trench coats. I found my gray, shapeless, $9 wool coat where it had been stuffed in the back corner. I put it on. I buttoned it all the way to the chin. I turned back to look at them one last time. Victor was pouring himself a drink, his hands shaking so hard the bottle clattered against the glass. Denise was weeping into her napkin, mourning the loss of her perfect evening, not the loss of her daughter. "It wasn't the money, Mom," I said quietly. "It was the lie." I opened the heavy front door. The cold wind hit me instantly, biting and raw, but for the first time in years, it felt cleaner than the air inside. I stepped out into the snow, my grandmother's hand in mine, leaving the warmth of the mansion behind for the cold truth of the night. The taxi ride from the gated sanctuary of Evergreen Ridge to the crumbling pavement of Oakwood Avenue was a descent into a different world. It was a journey measured not in miles, but in socioeconomic status. The driver, a man with tired eyes and a heavy coat, kept glancing in the rearview mirror. He looked at my grandmother's fur coat, then at my worn-out boots, and then at the destination on his GPS. He did not say a word, but his confusion was loud enough to fill the cab. When we pulled up to the curb in front of my building, the contrast was almost comical. The streetlights here flickered with a sickly orange hum. The snow on the sidewalk was not the pristine white powder of my parents' estate. It was a gray sludge, mixed with trash and exhaust fumes. "Are you sure this is the place, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing a group of teenagers huddled near a burning trash barrel down the block. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is it." I paid him, my hands trembling as I counted out the bills. But Eleanor reached over and tapped her card on the reader before I could finish. She opened the door and stepped out into the slush. She did not flinch. She stood on the broken sidewalk with the same regal posture she held in boardrooms, looking up at the peeling facade of the tenement building. "It is around the back," I said, feeling a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. "The front entrance is for the upstairs tenants. I have the service entrance." I led her down the narrow, concrete alleyway. It was dark, the motion sensor light having burned out 3 months ago. The stairs leading down to my unit were steep and slick with ice. I went first, holding my hand out to guide her, terrified she might slip. "Watch the third step, Grandma," I warned. "The concrete is crumbling." We reached the bottom. The door to my apartment was a heavy, rusted metal slab. I jammed my key into the lock, jiggling it violently. It always stuck in the cold. I had to lean my shoulder against the metal and shove. With a screech of protesting hinges, the door gave way. The smell hit us instantly. It was a thick, physical wall of odor, damp earth, stale frying oil from the neighbors upstairs, and the unmistakable, sharp tang of black mold. It was the smell of poverty. It was the smell of a place where things went to rot. I reached inside and flicked the switch. The single bare bulb in the center of the room flickered to life, casting harsh shadows into the corners. "Welcome home," I murmured, the sarcasm tasting bitter on my tongue. Eleanor stepped inside. She pulled her fur coat tighter around herself, not out of snobbery, but out of instinct. The air inside was barely warmer than the air outside. The room was exactly as I had left it. The folding table I used as a desk and dining area was cluttered with sketches and unpaid bills. My bed, a mattress on a metal frame, groaned as the floorboards shifted under our weight. The window, which was at ground level with the parking lot outside, was covered in layers of duct tape and plastic sheeting to keep the draft out, but the plastic fluttered rhythmically with the wind. And there, in the center of the room, was the bucket. Plip, plip, plip. The brown water from the leaking pipe hit the plastic with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silence. Eleanor did not speak. She walked slowly around the perimeter of the room. She reached out a gloved hand and touched the wall near my bed. When she pulled her fingers back, the glove was damp. She looked at the moisture, her expression unreadable. She walked to the kitchenette, a hot plate and a mini fridge sitting on a plywood counter. She opened the fridge. Inside, there was a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of peanut butter, and a single apple that was starting to shrivel. It was a stark, brutal inventory of my life. "I tried to make it cozy," I said, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the damp air. I felt the need to defend my squalor, a reflex to protect her from the horror of it. "It is not so bad once the heater gets going. I have a system, I wear layers, and the location is, well, it is close to the bus stop." Eleanor turned to look at me. Her eyes were wet. "Camila, the landlord, have you told him about the water? About the heat?" "Of course I have," I said, rubbing my arms to generate friction. "He says the building is old. He says if I want luxury, I should pay for luxury. If I complain too much, he threatens to evict me. And at $800 a month, I can't find anything else." Eleanor closed the fridge door. She looked at the space heater, the little orange coil glowing bravely against the overwhelming cold. She looked at the stack of library books on the floor because I couldn't afford a bookshelf. "Did they know?" she asked. She didn't have to specify who they were. "Yes," I said. I sat down on the edge of my mattress, the springs squeaking. "They dropped me off here once, last year. My car broke down, and Dad gave me a lift after his golf game. He pulled into the alley." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I asked him if he wanted to come in for coffee. He rolled down the window, sniffed the air, and said, "Good God, Camila, it smells like a soup kitchen down here. I am not ruining my Italian loafers in that sludge." Then he drove off. Eleanor let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She brought a hand to her mouth, covering her lips as if to hold back a scream. She wasn't just crying. She was crumbling. The image of the strong, iron-willed CEO dissolved, replaced by a grandmother realizing she had been an unwitting accomplice to the torture of her own blood. She walked over to the folding chair, the only chair I owned, and sat down heavily. She rested her forehead on the handle of her cane. "I sent them money every month," she whispered into the floor. "For 5 years, since you turned 19, not just the house money, I sent an allowance, $2,500 a month, for living expenses. Denise told me you used it for organic groceries and yoga classes." I stared at her. $2,500. That was more than I made in a month working 2 jobs. That money could have fixed my car. It could have moved me out of this basement. It could have bought me food that wasn't instant noodles. "I never saw a dime, Grandma," I said quietly. "I know," she sobbed. "I know that now." Then she looked up, and her face was twisted in a pain so raw I almost looked away. "But that is not the worst of it. Camila, The money. Money can be replaced, but they stole your life. I frowned. What do you mean? The Rhode Island School of Design, she said. My heart stopped. What about it? I didn't go. Dad said we couldn't afford it. Eleanor shook her head slowly. No, that is not what happened. When you got accepted, I was so proud. I wired $80,000 to Victor's account the next day. It was a specific trust for your tuition. It was earmarked. It was yours. The room seemed to spin. $80,000? Victor called me a week later, Eleanor continued, her voice trembling with rage. He told me you had changed your mind. He said you decided you weren't good enough. He said you told him, I do not have the talent for this. Dad, I do not want to waste Grandma's money. He said you wanted to go to community college to find yourself instead. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe. I remembered that conversation. I remembered sitting in the living room, crying, begging my father to find a way to make the numbers work. I remembered him looking at me with sad eyes, telling me, it is just too expensive. Honey, maybe it is for the best. You were always a little mediocre with your sketches anyway. This saves you the embarrassment of failing. He hadn't just stolen the money. He had stolen my confidence. He had stolen my dream. He had looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless, while pocketing the cash that proved I was worthy. He told me I wasn't good enough, I whispered, the tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. I believed him. For 4 years. I believed I was a failure who didn't deserve to go. Eleanor stood up. The motion was sudden. She wiped her face with a silk handkerchief. When she lowered her hand, the grief was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. It was the face of a woman who was about to burn a kingdom to the ground. Pack a bag, she commanded. What? I sniffed, wiping my nose on my sleeve. Pack a bag. Camila, she repeated, her voice steady and steel-hard. Get your documents, your birth certificate, your passport if you have one. Leave the clothes. Leave the furniture. Take only what you cannot replace. Where are we going? I asked, standing up. You are never sleeping under this leaking ceiling again, Eleanor said, looking at the water stain with pure hatred. We are going to the Ritz-Carlton downtown, and then, tomorrow morning, we are going to war. I scrambled to grab my backpack. I shoved my sketchbook inside, the only thing I had kept from my design dreams. I grabbed my laptop. I grabbed the photo of me and Eleanor from when I was 5. I'm ready, I said, my voice shaking. Good, Eleanor said. She walked to the door and kicked it open with a surprising amount of force. Let's get out of this hellhole. 30 minutes later, the world had shifted on its axis again. The suite at the Ritz-Carlton was larger than my entire apartment. The carpet was so thick my boots sank into it. The air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive soap. It was 72 degrees. Go take a shower, Eleanor told me. A long one. Order whatever you want from room service. I have work to do. I went into the bathroom. It was all marble and gold fixtures. I turned the handle, and hot water, glorious, steaming, infinite hot water, poured out. I stripped off my layers of thrift store clothes. I stood under the spray for 40 minutes, scrubbing my skin until it was red, trying to wash off the smell of the basement, the smell of poverty, the smell of my parents' lies. When I finally came out, wrapped in a plush white robe that felt like a hug, room service had arrived. There was a steak, there were roasted vegetables, there was a chocolate cake. But I didn't eat immediately. I looked over at the desk by the window. Eleanor was sitting there. She had her laptop open. She had her phone on speaker. Her reading glasses were perched on her nose, and she was typing furiously. Yes, Marcus, she was saying into the phone. I want a full forensic audit, going back 10 years. I want every transfer, every withdrawal, every credit card payment cross-referenced. She paused, listening to the lawyer on the other end. I don't care if it is Christmas Eve, she snapped, her voice slicing through the room. Wake the judge up if you have to. I want a temporary restraining order on the trust assets. Freeze Victor's accounts. Freeze Denise's accounts. Freeze the company cards. I want them to wake up tomorrow morning and find that they cannot buy a cup of coffee." She looked up and saw me standing there. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Eat, Camilla," she said gently. "You need your strength. Tomorrow, we go to the law firm, and you are going to get back every single cent they stole from you, with interest." I sat down at the table. I cut a piece of steak. I took a bite. It was warm. It was real. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled below us. Somewhere out there, in the dark. My parents were probably sleeping in their mansion, perhaps worrying about how to spin this to their friends, but likely thinking they could talk their way out of it like they always did. They had no idea that the soup kitchen daughter and the senile grandmother were currently sitting in a penthouse, sharpening their knives. I looked at Eleanor, typing away, dismantling my parents' life one keystroke at a time. I took another bite of food. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for battle. I woke up the next morning not to the sound of water dripping into a plastic bucket, but to silence. It was a heavy, expensive silence that only exists in rooms with triple-paned glass and soundproofed walls. For a moment, I panicked, thrashing in the sheets, thinking I had overslept for my shift at the dental clinic. Then I saw the crown molding on the ceiling and remembered. I was at the Ritz-Carlton, and I was going to war. At the foot of the king-sized bed stood a clothing rack on wheels. It had not been there the night before. Hanging on it were 4 distinct outfits, all in varying shades of charcoal, navy, and cream. There was a note pinned to a silk blouse in Eleanor's handwriting. "Dress like the person you are, not the person they told you to be." I got out of bed and ran my fingers over the fabric. It was cashmere. It was silk. It was wool that felt like butter. I chose a tailored slate gray pantsuit and a cream blouse. When I put them on, I looked in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The suit fit my shoulders perfectly. The pants did not drag on the floor or squeeze my waist. I looked taller. I looked dangerous. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, when she knocked on the connecting door. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked at me, and a small, tight smile appeared on her lips. "Good. You look like a Wagner, the real kind." We took a town car to the financial district. The destination was the Langston and Crowell building, a glass needle piercing the gray winter sky. My parents had always spoken about places like this with a mix of reverence and exclusion. They told me these buildings were for serious people, implying I was inherently unserious. We rode the elevator to the 38th floor in silence. When the doors opened, the reception area smelled of leather and intimidation. "Mrs. Price," the receptionist said, standing up immediately, "Mr. Langston is expecting you in the main conference room." We walked down a long hallway lined with abstract art. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor, a sharp, authoritative sound that felt miles away from the squelch of my old boots. When we entered the conference room, the air was so tense it felt like it could snap a neck. Victor and Denise were already there, sitting on one side of a mahogany table that was long enough to land a plane on. Victor was wearing a suit, but his tie was slightly crooked, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Denise was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, clutching her designer handbag like a life raft. They looked up as we entered. Victor started to stand, a reflex of fake politeness, but he froze when he saw me. He blinked, his eyes scanning the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the way I held my head. He was looking for the scared, disheveled girl in the $9 coat he had seen last night. She wasn't there. "Camilla," he stammered, sinking back into his chair. You look different." "I feel different," I said calmly, taking the seat opposite him. Eleanor sat at the head of the table. A man in a pinstripe suit was organizing a stack of files in the center of the table. He looked up, his face sharp and impassive. "Good morning. I am Marcus Langston. I represent Mrs. Eleanor Price and, as of this morning, Miss Camilla Wagner." "This is ridiculous," Denise hissed, her voice shaking. She did not take off her sunglasses. dragged out of bed at 8 in the morning for a family squabble. We could have discussed this at the house. Mother. This is not a family squabble. Mrs. Wagner, Marcus said. His voice was smooth, deep, and devoid of warmth. This is a forensic audit of the Camilla Wagner Family Trust. He opened a thick file folder. The sound of the paper turning was loud in the quiet room. Let us begin with the assets, Marcus said. Mrs. Price established this trust to ensure her granddaughter's education, housing, and general welfare. The trustees, you, Mr. and Mrs. Wagner, were granted fiduciary power to manage these funds solely for the beneficiary's best interest. Victor cleared his throat. And we have. We have managed them impeccably. The market has just been down. Let us look at the ledger, Marcus said, ignoring him. On August 14th, 2020, a wire transfer of $450,000 was received from Mrs. Price. The memo line read, House purchase for Camilla. He slid a piece of paper across the table toward my parents. On August 15th, 2020, $450,000 was transferred out of the trust account. Marcus continued. However, it did not go to a title company. It did not go to a seller. It was transferred to a holding company called Silver Birch Ventures, LLC. Victor shifted in his seat. That is a vehicle we use for real estate, to protect Camilla's privacy. Silver Birch Ventures, LLC is the legal owner of the property at 14 Silver Birch Lane, Marcus said, also known as the Silver Birch Cove Retreat, your vacation home. It is Camilla's house, Denise blurted out. We use it sometimes. We are keeping it warm for her. You use it every weekend, I said, speaking for the first time. I have seen the photos. You hosted the Rotary Club mixer there last month. You told everyone it was your lakeside sanctuary. We are maintaining the asset, Victor shouted, his face turning red. Houses need people in them. Marcus held up a hand. Let us move on. On September 1st, 2020, an additional $60,000 was wired for renovations to Camilla's kitchen. Tracking the funds shows that $45,000 of that sum was paid to elite European motor cars. He looked at Victor over the rim of his glasses. Unless Camilla's kitchen drives a 2021 Range Rover, Mr. Wagner, I fail to see how this serves the beneficiary. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor opened his mouth like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Moving on to the monthly allowance, Marcus said, flipping a page. $2,500 a month, sent religiously by Mrs. Price for 5 years, totaling $150,000. I felt a wave of nausea. $150,000. That money could have changed everything for me. The records show these funds were deposited into the trust and then immediately siphoned into a checking account labeled Wagner Household Operations, Marcus said. This account pays for your country club membership, your housekeeper, and your wine cellar maintenance. That is a management fee, Victor argued, finding his voice again. Managing a trust is hard work. We are entitled to compensation for our time. A 100% management fee? Marcus asked dryly. The law usually allows for 1 or 2%. Mr. Wagner, taking the entirety of the beneficiary's allowance to pay for your golf handicap is not management. It is embezzlement. Embezzlement is a strong word, Denise said, her voice trembling. She finally took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and swollen. We are family. We share resources. Camilla knows we would give her the shirt off our backs. I asked you for $500 to fix my car brakes last winter, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You told me you were liquid poor and that I should take the bus. You were wearing that Cartier watch while you said it. Denise looked away. And finally, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a graver tone, we have the matter of the tuition fund, $80,000. She didn't want to go, Victor cried, pointing at me. She told us she wasn't good enough. We didn't steal it. She refused it. Even if she refused it, Marcus said sharply, the money should have remained in the trust. It should not have been used to pay off a gambling debt at the Golden Horseshoe Casino. Victor went pale. He looked at Eleanor. Mother, there is a context for that. Eleanor didn't even blink. She looked like a statue carved out of judgment. I am waiting for the context. Victor, I am waiting to hear how my granddaughter's education paid for your bad luck at the blackjack table. But this is not the worst of it, Marcus said. He closed the file folder and placed his hands on top of it. In reviewing the credit reports this morning, we found something else. He tapped a few keys on his laptop and turned the screen around so my parents could see it. 3 unsecured personal loans, Marcus listed, totaling $75,000, taken out in the name of Camilla Wagner. I gasped. I never took out a loan. I can't even get a credit card with a limit over $500. I know you didn't, Marcus said gently to me. Then he turned his shark-like gaze back to Victor. Because the digital signatures on these loan documents were traced to an IP address located at your residence in Evergreen Ridge, and the funds were deposited into your personal checking account. Victor slumped in his chair. He looked small. The blustering businessman facade had completely disintegrated. That is identity theft, Marcus said. That is bank fraud. That is wire fraud. We intended to pay it back, Victor whispered, his voice cracking. It was a bridge loan, just until the market turned. You used your daughter's credit rating as a piggy bank, Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. You ruined her financial reputation before she even had a chance to build one. You let her live in a basement with black mold while you spent her money on a lifestyle you could not afford. We are your children, Denise sobbed, burying her face in her hands. How can you be so cruel? We made mistakes, but we love her. Love? Eleanor slammed her hand on the table, making everyone jump. You let her walk in the snow in a $9 coat. You let her starve. Do not dare use that word in this room. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Here is the situation. Mr. and Mrs. Wagner, I have drafted a complaint for the district attorney's office. It details 12 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Given the amounts involved, we are looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Denise let out a high-pitched wail. Victor looked like he was going to vomit. Prison? Victor choked out. You would send us to prison? Your own son? I am not sending you anywhere, Eleanor said coldly. You sent yourselves there the moment you signed Camilla's name on those documents. However, Marcus interrupted, sliding a new stack of documents across the table. Ms. Wagner and Mrs. Price have authorized me to offer an alternative resolution, a civil settlement. Victor reached for the papers with shaking hands. Anything. We will do anything. It is not a negotiation, Victor, Eleanor said. It is a surrender. I watched them. I watched the parents who had towered over me my whole life, the people whose approval I had begged for, whose lies I had protected. They looked like terrified children. The glamour was gone. The perfect family image was gone. All that was left were 2 criminals in expensive suits, realizing that the bill had finally come due. Read it carefully, Marcus advised, because once you sign this, you are stripping yourselves of everything you stole, and if you hesitate, I make the call to the district attorney before you can leave this building. Victor looked at the document, his eyes widening as he read the first page. He looked at me, pleadingly. Camilla, surely you don't want this. We can work this out. We can pay you back over time. I don't want a payment plan. Dad, I said, my voice steady and hard. I want my life back. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of Denise weeping softly and the hum of the hard drive on Marcus's laptop, recording every second of their downfall. The air in the conference room at Langston and Crowell had shifted. It was no longer the tense silence of a waiting room. It was the suffocating, airtight pressure of a coffin lid being nailed shut. Marcus Langston clasped his hands on top of the forensic audit file. He looked at my parents not with malice, but with the bored efficiency of an executioner who had a lunch reservation to get to. You have 2 roads ahead of you, Marcus stated, his voice devoid of any theatrical flair. Road number 1 involves Mrs. Price handing this entire file to the district attorney. Given the interstate nature of the wire fraud and the age of the victim, Mrs. Price, the federal prosecutors will be very interested. We are talking about indictments for money laundering, bank fraud, and elder abuse. You will be arrested, you will be arraigned, and given your current liquidity issues, you will likely remain in custody until trial. He paused, letting the word custody hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Road number 2, Marcus continued, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany table, is a complete and immediate civil resolution. Victor stared at the document as if it were radioactive. What does that mean? It means you strip yourselves bare. Eleanor answered. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands resting on the head of her cane. She did not look like my grandmother anymore. She looked like a judge. I have been soft for 30 years. Victor, I bailed you out of bad investments. I looked the other way when you lived beyond your means because I wanted peace. But today, my softness ends. She turned to look at me, and her eyes softened just a fraction. I could send you to prison. God knows you deserve it. But a trial takes years. It takes depositions, testimonies, and media circuses. I will not have Camilla dragged through the mud of a public scandal just to prove what we already know. I want her life back today, not 5 years from now. So here are the terms, Marcus said, tapping the document. First, you will immediately transfer full ownership of Silver Birch Ventures, LLC, to Camilla Wagner. That includes the lake house, the land, and all contents within. You will vacate the premises within 48 hours. The contents? Denise squeaked, clutching her pearls. But my art collection is in there. The antique rugs. Bought with trust fund money, Marcus countered sharply. They belong to the trust. They belong to Camilla. Second, Marcus continued, ignoring Denise's gasp, you will liquidate your personal investment accounts, what is left of them, to repay the $150,000 in stolen allowance and the $80,000 in tuition funds. Mrs. Price will cover the difference immediately to ensure Camilla is made whole today, but you will owe the remainder to Mrs. Price as a personal debt, collateralized by your primary residence in Evergreen Ridge. Victor's face went purple. You are putting a lien on our home? That is our primary asset. It is the only asset you have left that wasn't stolen, Eleanor said. Consider it a kindness that I am not evicting you from that too, yet. Third, Marcus finished, flipping to the final page. You will sign a formal renunciation of any future inheritance. Mrs. Price has drafted a new will as of this morning. Camilla Wagner is now the sole beneficiary of the Price estate. You get nothing. Not now. Not when she passes. Not ever. The explosion happened instantly. Victor shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his eyes bulging with a mix of fear and narcissism. This is a setup, he shouted, spit flying from his lips. You planned this, you little snake. You sat in that basement, hoarding your little receipts, waiting for the perfect moment to ambush us. You lured us into a trap. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, then sold that bike when I was 12 and told me it was stolen. I didn't lure you anywhere, Dad, I said. My voice was calm, which seemed to infuriate him more. I was just trying to survive the situation you put me in. I was trying to toughen you up, Victor roared, slamming his hand on the table. I was teaching you the value of $1. I wanted you to have grit. And this is how you repay me? By stealing my property? Your property? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You talk about teaching me grit? You told me that walking a mile in the snow would build character. Do you know what I was doing while I walked? I was counting steps so I wouldn't think about how cold my feet were. And while I was doing that, you were using my tuition money to pay for a heated golf cart at the club. I reached into the folder Marcus had prepared and pulled out a credit card statement. You lectured me on fiscal responsibility when I asked for help with rent, I said, sliding the paper toward him. But on that same day, October 4th. You spent $4,000 on a single dinner at Le Bernardin. Do not talk to me about grit. Victor, you have never known a hard day in your life. You just stole my hard days and called them lessons. Camilla, please, Denise moaned, changing tactics. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, trying to grab mine. I pulled my hand back as if she were made of fire. Baby, look at me, Denise pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I am your mother. I stayed up with you when you had chickenpox. I drove you to ballet. Does that mean nothing? We are a family. You cannot let them take everything. We will be destitute. You will have a house, I said coldly. You just won't have my money to heat it. But the club, Denise wailed, revealing her true priority. If we lose the liquid assets, we can't pay the dues. We will be expelled. All our friends are there. We will be social pariahs. Camila, please, let us keep the membership. Just that. I will give you the lake house, but don't take our standing. I stared at her. She was facing federal prison, and she was worried about a country club membership. It was pathetic. It was illuminating. It was the final nail in the coffin of my love for them. You are worried about your friends? Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Denise, you don't have friends. You have an audience, and the show has been canceled. Eleanor turned to Marcus. They are wasting time. Pick up the phone. Marcus, call the district attorney. Marcus reached for the landline on the conference table. He lifted the receiver. His finger hovered over the dial pad. Wait! Victor screamed. The fight drained out of him instantly, replaced by sheer, primal terror. Wait! Put the phone down! He looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at the future. A choice between a jail cell or a smaller life. He realized he had no leverage. He had no cards. He was not the powerful patriarch he pretended to be. He was just a thief who had been caught. Give me the pen, Victor whispered. Victor, no, Denise sobbed. We can't sign that. It is admitting guilt. Shut up, Denise, Victor snapped, his voice cracking. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want to wear an orange jumpsuit? Because that is the alternative. He grabbed the heavy fountain pen Marcus offered. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed the transfer of the Silver Birch property. He signed the confession of debt. He signed away his inheritance. With every stroke of the pen, he seemed to shrink physically, deflating like a punctured balloon. He shoved the papers toward Denise. Sign it. Denise wept openly now, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the glass room. My lake house, she cried, mourning the property as if it were a dead child. My beautiful retreat. I picked out those curtains. I designed that patio. You designed it with my money, I said. Sign the paper, Mom. She picked up the pen. A tear fell directly onto the signature line, blotting the paper. She signed her name through the water damage. For the first time in my life, her tears did not make me feel guilty. I watched her cry, and I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No urge to apologize. I just felt a profound sense of relief, like a fever finally breaking. Marcus took the papers back. He checked the signatures. He stamped them with a notary seal. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was final. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to me. This is the deed to 14 Silver Birch Lane, Marcus said formally. It has been prepared in anticipation of this signature. The property is now solely in your name, Ms. Wagner. The keys have been retrieved from your parents' residence this morning by our courier. I took the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt real. Victor and Denise sat slumped in their chairs, looking like the wreckage of a car crash. They were still rich by most standards. They had their main house, their cars, but they were hollowed out. They had lost the infinite tap of Eleanor's wealth, and more importantly, they had lost their control over me. Eleanor stood up. She looked down at her son and daughter-in-law with an expression of infinite fatigue. You should go now, Eleanor said. You have 48 hours to remove your personal effects from Camilla's house. Do not take a single light bulb. Do not take a single spoon. If anything is missing, Marcus will make that call. Victor stood up shakily. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only a bitter, simmering resentment. "You think you won," he spat. "But you are all alone now. You have no parents." "I haven't had parents in a long time, Victor," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I just had landlords who overcharged me." They left the room. Denise was still sobbing, clinging to Victor's arm as they shuffled out the door. When the door clicked shut, the silence that rushed back into the room was pure. It was clean. I looked at the deed in my hand. I ran my thumb over my name. Camilla Wagner, owner. Eleanor reached over and covered my hand with hers. "It does not undo the cold nights," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And it does not give you back the years they took, but at least a part of what you suffered has been returned to its rightful owner." I looked at her, and then I looked at the glass wall of the office, staring out at the city covered in snow. "It is a start," I said. "It is a start." 3 days later, I returned to the basement on Oakwood Avenue. I was not alone this time. I was accompanied by 2 men from a high-end moving company who looked bewildered to be carrying their pristine cardboard boxes into a damp, subterranean hallway. The room looked different. It felt smaller. When I had lived here, surviving day to day, my world had shrunk to fit these 4 peeling walls. I had normalized the smell of mildew. I had accepted the darkness. But now, viewing it through the lens of someone who had spent 3 nights in a hotel suite with clean sheets and heating, the squalor was suffocating. It looked like a crime scene where a spirit had been slowly crushed. I was packing my sketches into a portfolio case. The movers were efficiently boxing up my few books. Eleanor was sitting on my only chair, the metal folding one, near the back wall. She had her hands rested on her cane, watching the process with a quiet, grim satisfaction. Then the banging started. It was not a knock. It was a violent, rhythmic hammering that shook the rusted metal door in its frame. Dust trickled down from the ceiling with each blow. "Camilla!" My father's voice muffled through the steel, but the panic in it was unmistakable. "Open this door. Immediately. We know you're in there." The movers froze, looking at me for instruction. Eleanor did not flinch. She just tightened her grip on her cane and gave me a curt nod. I walked to the door. My pulse was elevated, but it wasn't the erratic, fearful rhythm of the past. It was the steady beat of adrenaline before a fight I knew I would win. I turned the lock and pulled the heavy door open. Victor was standing on the concrete landing, his fist raised to hammer again. He was wearing a trench coat that was buttoned wrong, and his hair, usually lacquered into place, was windblown and chaotic. Behind him, Denise stood shivering in a thin cashmere wrap that was entirely unsuited for the freezing temperatures. She looked gray, her face stripped of makeup, her eyes darting around the alleyway as if afraid the paparazzi were hiding behind the dumpsters. Victor tried to push past me, leading with his shoulder, assuming the physical dominance he had always held. I did not move. I planted my feet and blocked the doorway with my body. "We are busy, Victor," I said. My voice was low, but it echoed in the narrow stairwell. He stopped, startled by the resistance. He looked down at me, his face twisting into a snarl. "Busy? You are looting the place. You think you can just sign some papers and walk away? You ungrateful little—" Then he saw her. Over my shoulder, past the boxes, he saw his mother sitting on the folding chair in the center of the damp room. She stared back at him, her expression as cold as the concrete floor. Victor took a half step back. The air seemed to leave his lungs. "Mother," he choked out, I didn't think you would come back to this hole." "It is fascinating what you find when you look where you are not supposed to," Eleanor said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind howling down the stairs. Dennis peeked out from behind Victor's shoulder. Her teeth were chattering. "Mother, please, we need to talk. The bank frozen the accounts this morning. The credit cards were declined at the gas station. We had to use cash. We barely had enough for gas." "That is generally how freezing assets works, Denise," Eleanor replied, unbothered. Victor regained his composure, or at least a manic approximation of it. He turned his glare back to me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You did this," he hissed, pointing a finger in my face. "You poisoned her against us. You twisted everything. I was protecting you. Camila, everything I did, the trust, the loans, it was all to build a safety net for the family. For you." "A safety net?" I repeated. I stepped back, allowing him a view of the room but not allowing him to enter. I swept my arm across the space. "Look at this, Dad," I commanded. "Look at it." I pointed to the red plastic bucket in the middle of the floor. "That bucket catches the water that drips on my head while I sleep. Is that protection?" I pointed to the wall behind the bed, where a large, dark bloom of black mold had eaten through the wallpaper. "That is toxic mold. I have had a cough for 2 years. Is that the safety net?" I pointed to the space heater, the cheap orange coil gathering dust in the corner. "That cost me $20 at a pawn shop, because you told me you didn't have the funds to help me when the landlord refused to fix the furnace. You let me freeze. Victor, you let me freeze while you installed a heated driveway for your cars." "You needed to learn," Victor shouted, his voice cracking. "You were soft. You needed to understand the real world. If we just gave you everything, you would be weak. You wouldn't survive a day without us." "I have survived 3 years without you," I yelled back, my control slipping just enough to let the anger sear him. "I survived hunger. I survived cold. I survived loneliness. The only thing I almost didn't survive was your lies." Denise pushed past Victor, grabbing the doorframe with white-knuckled hands. She looked desperate, her eyes swimming with tears. "Camila, baby, please," she wailed. "We are still a family. You cannot do this to us. Think about the optics. Think about our standing. Are you really going to watch us lose everything? Are you going to watch your parents move into a condo? Are you going to let us lose our friends?" I looked at my mother. I waited. I waited for the words that might, just might, have softened the blow. I waited for "I am sorry." I waited for "We hurt you." I waited for "Forgive us." But they didn't come. Even now, standing in the doorway of the squalor they had forced me into, all she could talk about was her condo, her friends, her optics. She didn't see me. She never had. She only saw the reflection of herself that I provided. "I am waiting," I said quietly. "For what?" Denise sniffed, wiping her nose. "We said we would give you the lake house. We signed the papers. What more do you want?" "An apology," I said. "A real one." Victor laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous bark. "An apology? For raising you? For putting clothes on your back for 18 years? You owe us an apology. Camila, you are destroying this family out of spite." The last thread of attachment I had to them snapped. It wasn't painful. It was liberating. "I am not destroying your life, Victor," I said, using his first name. It felt like a slap, and I saw him flinch. "I am just taking back the fuel you were using to run it. I am not taking your money. I am taking my money. The money you stole. I am not taking your house. I am stopping you from buying a third one with my credit score." I looked at Denise, who was trembling, her lips blue from the cold. "Khan did not make you poor. Mom," I said, "I just stopped letting you be rich at the cost of my survival." Victor lunged forward, his face purple. "You ungrateful little brat! I will—" "You will do absolutely nothing," Eleanor's voice rang out. She stood up. It was a slow, painful movement, but when she straightened her spine, she looked 10 feet tall. She walked toward the door, her cane tapping rhythmically on the concrete. Tap, tap, tap. She stopped beside me, presenting a united front. She looked at her son with a gaze of absolute finality. "If you take one step into this apartment," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "or if you ever attempt to contact Camila again, or if you show up at her new home, I will instruct Marcus to file the criminal complaint. I have the papers drafted. I have the evidence boxed up." Victor froze. The threat of prison was the only language he understood. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I am your son." "And she is my granddaughter," Eleanor retorted. And for the first time in 30 years, I am choosing the one who deserves my protection. Now, get out of my sight. Victor looked at me. He looked at the moldy walls one last time. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to throw one last insult, one last guilt trip, but he saw the look in my eyes. He saw that the bank was closed. The audience had left the building. He turned around, grabbing Denise by the arm roughly. "Come on," he muttered. "But Victor," Denise protested. "It is over, Denise," he snapped. He dragged her up the concrete stairs. I watched them go. I watched the expensive soles of Victor's shoes slip on the slush. I watched Denise's thin wrap flutter in the biting wind. They looked small. They looked ordinary. They looked like two people who had just realized that winter is very cold when you do not have someone else's fire to keep you warm. When their footsteps faded, I turned back to the room. The movers had finished. The room was empty now. Save for the bucket and the space heater, it looked like a hollow shell. I walked over to the door. I grabbed the handle. My hand did not shake. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked. She was watching me closely. I looked at the darkness of the alleyway, then back at the empty, miserable room that had been my entire world for 3 years. I thought about the girl who had cried herself to sleep here, wondering why she wasn't good enough. I felt a sudden, fierce affection for that girl. She had survived. She had walked through the fire, or rather, the ice, and she had made it out. "Yes," I said. "I am ready." I stepped out onto the landing. Eleanor followed me. I pulled the heavy metal door shut. It closed with a resounding clang that felt like a gavel hitting a sounding block. I took the key from my pocket, the key that stuck, the key that I had hated for so long. I slid it into the lock. I turned it. Click. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a prison cell opening, not closing. I have been ready to leave this place for a long time. "Grandma," I said, looking at the rusted metal. "I just didn't have the key to the way out until today." Eleanor smiled. She reached out and took my arm. "Well then, let's go home, the real one." We walked up the stairs together, into the cold, clean air of the afternoon, leaving the basement, the mold, and the Wagners in the dark behind us. The drive to Silver Birch Cove took 40 minutes. For years, I had seen this journey documented in my father's Facebook albums. He would post a photo of the winding road lined with pines, captioned, "Heading to the sanctuary after a brutal week of grinding." I used to look at those photos from the break room of the dental clinic, eating a cold sandwich, wondering what it felt like to have a sanctuary. Now, sitting in the passenger seat of Eleanor's town car, watching those same pines blur past, I realized the grind he was escaping was the exhausting labor of spending my money. We pulled up to the security gate. It was a massive iron structure, flanked by stone pillars. A guard in a uniform stepped out of the booth, smiling familiarly as the window rolled down. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Wagner," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He paused, peering into the back seat, his smile faltering when he didn't see Victor's flushed face or Denise's oversized sunglasses. Eleanor leaned forward. She did not smile. "Victor and Denise Wagner no longer have access to this property," she said. Her voice was cool and crisp, like the winter air. "This is Ms. Camilla Wagner. She is the owner of number 14. Please update your logs. If the previous occupants attempt to enter, you are to call the police, not the house." The guard blinked, looking at me. I sat up straighter. I was wearing the slate gray coat Eleanor had bought me. No more $9 wool. "Ms. Wagner," the guard stammered, typing quickly into his tablet. "My apologies. Welcome home, ma'am." Welcome home. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a flavor I couldn't quite identify. We drove through the gates and down the winding lane. When the house came into view, my breath caught in my throat. It was beautiful. A modern cottage with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over a frozen lake. It sat nestled in the snow like a jewel. And every brick, every shingle, every pane of glass had been paid for with the hours I spent standing on concrete floors washing dishes. I unlocked the front door. My hand was steady. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of mold or old grease. It was the smell of expensive vanilla candles and new leather. It smelled like a boutique hotel. I walked into the living room. It was vast, with a vaulted ceiling and a stone fireplace that stretched 20 feet high. The furniture was aggressively white. White linen sofas, white wool rugs, glass coffee tables with sharp edges. It looked like a showroom. It looked like Denise. "It is sterile," I whispered. I walked to the mantel. There was a framed photo of my parents, clinking champagne glasses on the deck of this very house. They looked radiant. Victor was laughing, his head thrown back. Denise was looking at the camera with a smug, satisfied smile. I picked up the photo. I looked at the date stamped on the back. July 4th, 2021. I remembered that day. I had called them to ask if I could come over for a barbecue because I couldn't afford to buy meat for the holiday. Denise had told me they were traveling for business and couldn't host. They had been here, drinking champagne, celebrating their independence with my inheritance. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of rage. It wasn't just the money, it was the intimacy of the theft. Everywhere I looked, I saw them. There were monogrammed towels in the powder room with V&D, embroidered in gold thread. There was a humidor on the side table filled with Victor's imported cigars. There was a silk robe thrown casually over the back of a chair, as if Denise had just stepped out for a moment. "I can't live here," I said, my voice shaking. "It feels like I'm breaking into their house. It feels like they are still here, watching me, judging my shoes." Eleanor walked over to the massive sliding glass doors that looked out onto the lake. She unlocked the latch and threw them wide open. A gust of freezing wind rushed into the room, swirling the snow from the patio onto the expensive white rug. It instantly blew away the cloying scent of vanilla. "Houses do not have memories, Camila," Eleanor said, standing in the draft, her coat fluttering. "People do. Walls are just wood and stone. They do not know who paid for them. They only know who lives inside them now." She turned to me. "Let the cold air in. Let it chase out the smell of their perfume. And then, you decide what this space becomes." I took a deep breath. The cold air stung my lungs, sharp and clean. I looked at the white sofa. I looked at the glass table. "I don't want to smash it," I said, thinking about the rage that had been burning in me for days. That is what Victor would do. He would break things. I don't want to be like him. "Then what will you do?" Eleanor asked. "I want it gone," I said. All of it. Every stick of furniture they chose. Every piece of art they bought to impress their friends. I don't want to sell it, and I don't want to keep it. I pulled out my phone. I searched for a local number I had seen on a flyer at the dental clinic, a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse. They were always asking for furniture donations to help women set up new apartments. "I am donating it," I said. All of it. The white sofas, the rugs, the beds, everything. If my parents bought this luxury by exploiting a vulnerable woman, me, then this furniture should go to help vulnerable women start over. Eleanor smiled. It was a genuine, proud smile. That is a poetic redistribution of assets. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. I hired a crew to clear the house. It was deeply satisfying to watch the V&D towels being tossed into a donation bin. While the movers were clearing out the kitchen, I started going through the drawers. Denise was a hoarder of paperwork, believing that if she hid things in the back of a junk drawer, they ceased to exist legally. In the back of a cabinet, behind a fondue set that had clearly never been used, I found a metal box. Inside was a file labeled Victor Wagner Children's Foundation. I opened it. I expected to find brochures for a charity. Instead, I found tax documents. I sat on the floor and read them. My hands started to shake. It wasn't a charity. It was a shell. Victor had set up a fake nonprofit organization, claiming to collect donations for underprivileged youth. The documents showed donations coming in from his business partners, and then immediately flowing out as consulting fees paid to himself. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was using the idea of poor children as a tax shelter to hide the money he stole. "Grandma," I called out. Eleanor came into the kitchen. I handed her the file. She put on her glasses and read it. Her jaw tightened. "He is even stupider than I thought," she muttered. "This is tax evasion. Federal tax evasion." "What do we do?" I asked. "If we report this, it adds 5 years to his sentence." I looked at the file. I thought about the underprivileged youth he claimed to be helping. I was the underprivileged youth, and he had consumed me. "We don't keep secrets for them anymore," I said firmly. "Send it to Marcus. Let the IRS handle it. I am done protecting them from the consequences of their own greed." Once the house was empty, just a shell of hardwood floors and glass, I felt the heaviness lift. The ghosts of Victor and Denise were gone. Now, it was just a house. And I was a design student who had been denied her canvas for 4 years. I went to work. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to look at a price tag and walk away. I went to the paint store. I didn't choose the safe, beige colors my mother loved. I chose deep, rich greens for the living room, a color that brought the forest inside. I chose a warm terracotta for the kitchen. I ordered furniture that I actually liked. No more white linen that you couldn't sit on. I bought a massive, velvet sectional sofa in midnight blue, soft enough to sink into. I bought bookshelves, walls and walls of them, to hold the art books I had never been able to afford. I turned the guest bedroom overlooking the lake into a studio. I bought a drafting table. I bought the best markers, the best paper, the best lighting. When the delivery trucks arrived, I didn't hide in the back room like I was the help. I stood at the door and directed them. "Put that there. Turn this that way." "You have a good eye, lady," one of the movers said as we positioned a rug. "I know," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. A week later, Eleanor came to visit. She brought a bottle of champagne and a folder. We sat in the living room. The fire was crackling in the stone hearth. The room was warm, filled with the rich colors I had chosen. It felt like a hug. It felt like me. Eleanor placed the folder on the coffee table. "I have set up a new charitable trust," she said, "the Wagner Price Initiative. It is fully funded with $5 million. I looked at her, eyes wide. "That is a lot of money." "It is," she agreed. "And you are the sole trustee." "Me?" I choked. "Grandma, I just learned how to balance a checkbook that has more than $10 in it." "You know what it feels like to be invisible," Eleanor said seriously. "You know what it feels like to have your potential crushed by the people who are supposed to nurture it. I want you to use this money to find other young people like you. Kids who have talent but no support. Kids whose parents told them no because they were selfish. Give them scholarships. Give them housing. Give them the keys that you didn't get." I ran my hand over the folder. A responsibility, not a burden, but a tool. "I will," I promised. "I won't let you down." "You couldn't if you tried," she said. That night, after Eleanor left, I sat alone in my living room. I was wearing pajamas, soft flannel ones that I had bought new, not from a thrift bin. I held a mug of hot chocolate. I pulled up my banking app on my phone. I stared at the balance. It was a number that still didn't look real to me. It had commas. It had zeros. It was enough to buy groceries for the rest of my life. It was enough to never worry about a leaking pipe again. But more than the money, I looked at the name at the top of the screen. Camila Wagner. For 24 years, my life had been a script written by Victor and Denise. Camila is the supporting character. Camila is the prop. Camila is the failure. They had written my lines, directed my movements, and kept the budget of my happiness at zero. I looked at the blank sketchbook sitting on my lap. I picked up a pen. The silence in the house wasn't lonely anymore. It was expectant. It was the silence of a theater before the curtain rises on a new show. "If no one is writing the script for me anymore," I said aloud to the empty, beautiful room, "then I guess I can write whatever I want." I opened the book to the first page. I didn't draw a floor plan. I wrote a single sentence. Scene 1. The girl walks out of the basement and buys the building. Then I smiled, took a sip of cocoa, and turned the page to begin the rest of my life. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the confrontation in the basement. The calendar on the wall of my newly painted kitchen read December 25th. It was Christmas Day again. But this Christmas was nothing like the performance I had attended a year ago, or even the disaster of a dinner a few weeks prior. There were no crystal chandeliers dripping with diamonds. There was no 12-foot tree decorated by a professional stylist. There was no catering staff hovering in the shadows, waiting to clear plates the second a fork was set down. Instead, the air in my house at Silver Birch Cove smelled of roasted garlic, rosemary, and the wood smoke from the fireplace. I had cooked the meal myself. I had burned the rolls slightly, and the mashed potatoes were a little lumpy, but nobody cared. The table was set for 4. It was just me, Eleanor, Marcus, who had stopped being just a lawyer and started becoming a mentor, and Sarah, a young artist I had met while volunteering at the shelter. We were laughing. That was the biggest difference. The laughter wasn't polite or forced. It was loud. It bounced off the deep forest green walls I had painted and settled into the soft velvet of the midnight blue sofa. "Pass the wine, please," Eleanor said. Her cheeks flushed with genuine warmth. She looked younger tonight. The weight of the secret she had carried for 5 years was gone, replaced by the lightness of truth. I handed her the bottle. It wasn't a vintage from 1996. It was a $20 bottle I had picked out because I liked the label. It tasted better than anything Victor had ever poured. "To the chef," Marcus toasted, raising his glass, "even if she did incinerate the bread." "It adds texture," I joked, taking a sip. I looked around the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the frozen lake perfectly. Outside, the world was a canvas of blue and white, silent and cold. Inside, it was a fortress of warmth. I felt a sense of peace so profound it almost scared me. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for a criticism about my clothes or my career. I was just existing. Then, the monitor on the kitchen counter buzzed. It was a sharp, electronic sound that cut through the laughter like a knife. I froze. I knew that sound. It was the intercom for the front gate, located a quarter of a mile down the driveway. Eleanor set her glass down. Marcus straightened his tie, his lawyer instincts kicking in instantly. I walked over to the counter and pressed the button to activate the camera feed. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy black and white view of the snow-covered entrance. 2 figures were standing there. They looked small against the massive iron gates. Victor was wearing a coat that looked too thin for the weather, a wool blend, not his usual cashmere. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, blowing into his cupped hands. Denise was standing slightly behind him, clutching a large, cream-colored envelope against her chest. She wasn't wearing a hat, and the wind was whipping her hair across her face. They didn't look like the titans of industry they pretended to be. They didn't look like the flawless couple from the holiday cards. They looked like 2 cold, desperate people standing outside a party they were no longer invited to. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked softly, though I think she already knew. "It is them," I said. Victor reached out and pressed the buzzer again. Bzzzt. "Camilla?" His voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded tinny, stripped of its usual booming authority. "Camilla, are you there? We saw the lights. We know you are home." I stared at the screen. My heart did give a little jump, a conditioned reflex from 24 years of fearing his disapproval. But then I looked at the red bucket I had kept in the corner of the pantry as a reminder. I remembered the sound of the water dripping. Plip, plip. I remembered the $9 coat. "Camilla!" Denise's voice joined in, shrill and panicked. "Please, honey, it is Christmas. We brought you a letter. We just want to talk." I looked back at the table. Eleanor was watching me. She didn't stand up. She didn't tell me what to do. She simply folded her hands in her lap and waited. "What do you want to do?" Eleanor asked. "This is your house. It is your call. I support whatever decision you make." I looked at Marcus. He nodded slightly, indicating that legally, I had every right to leave them standing in the snow. I looked back at the screen. I saw my father, who had stolen my identity to fund his ego. I saw my mother, who had watched me starve so she could buy handbags. A strange realization washed over me. I didn't hate them. Hate takes energy. Hate requires passion. What I felt was distance, vast, unbridgeable distance. They felt like strangers. They felt like characters in a book I had finished reading and put back on the shelf. I reached out and pressed the talk button. "Hello, Victor. Hello, Denise," I said. My voice was calm. It didn't shake. On the screen, their heads snapped up toward the camera. "Camilla!" Victor exclaimed, trying to arrange his face into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank God. The code changed. The gate wouldn't open. "Buzz us in, sweetheart. It is freezing out here." "I know it is freezing," I said. "I walked in this weather to your house last year, remember?" Victor flinched. "Look, let's not rehash the past. We are family. It is Christmas. We just want to come in, have a drink, and normalize things. Your mother wrote you a beautiful letter." Denise held up the envelope to the camera, her hand trembling. "I poured my heart out. Baby, please, just 5 minutes." I looked at the envelope. Whatever was in there, excuses, guilt trips, maybe a request for a loan. I didn't need to read it. I already knew the story. "I am not opening the gate," I said. The silence on the other end was stunned. "What?" Victor snapped, the mask slipping. "Don't be ridiculous. We are your parents. You can't leave us standing in the snow." "This is my home," I said, leaning closer to the microphone, making sure they heard every word. "I bought the furniture. I paid for the heat. I own the lock. And the rule of this house is that people who steal from me do not get a seat at my table." "You need us!" Victor shouted, slamming his hand against the iron bars. "You think you can make it on your own? You are nothing without the Wagner name. You will come crawling back when you fail. You will beg us for help." "I think we both know that isn't true." "Dad," I replied, "I survived the basement you put me in. I can certainly survive my own success." "Camilla!" Denise wailed, stepping closer to the camera, her face distorted by the wide-angle lens. "Don't be cruel. What will people say if they see us standing out here? Think of the embarrassment." "Go home, Denise," I said. "Go back to your condo. Turn up the heat. Be grateful you still have that. But do not come back here." I didn't wait for their response. I reached out and pressed the end call button. The screen went black. The connection was severed. The room was silent for a moment, but it wasn't the heavy, terrified silence of my childhood. It was the silence of resolution. I turned back to the table. Marcus looked impressed. Sarah gave me a small thumbs up. Eleanor picked up her wine glass again. She looked at me with a mixture of pride and something else. Relief. She had been waiting to see if I would slide back into the role of the victim. I hadn't. She smiled. A small, sad, but genuine smile. "So, Camilla," she said, her voice soft but clear, echoing the question that had started this entire revolution. "Still living in the house I bought you?" I looked around the room. I looked at the art books I had bought. I looked at the drafting table in the corner where I had spent the morning working on a scholarship plan for a girl named Maya, who lived in a shelter downtown. I looked at the friends at my table. This wasn't the house Eleanor bought. That house had been a cold, white museum used for tax evasion. This was my home. "No, Grandma," I said, picking up my glass. "I am living in the house I chose, with the life I decided to build, and I have to say, I am doing pretty well here." We clinked glasses. The sound was bright and clear like a bell. After dinner, while the others were moving to the living room for coffee, I stepped out onto the back patio. The cold air hit me, but I didn't shiver. I was wearing the slate gray coat, the good one. I walked to the railing and looked out at the lake. The ice shimmered under the moonlight, a vast white expanse that stretched out into the darkness. Somewhere, miles away, Victor and Denise were driving home in the dark, trapped in the prison of their own making. They were prisoners of their image, their greed, and their lies. I heard Eleanor laughing inside. I heard the crackle of the fire. I turned around and walked back to the sliding glass door. I stepped inside, into the warmth. I reached out and turned the lock on the handle. Click. It wasn't a lock designed to keep the world out anymore. It wasn't about hiding. It was about defining my boundaries. I was locking the peace in. I was locking the safety in. I was locking the truth in. I looked at the reflection of the room in the glass. The warm light, the friends, the grandmother who loved me. I smiled at my reflection. The girl in the $9 coat was gone. The woman in the glass waved back, then turned off the light and went to join her family. The real one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from that cold basement to this warm house, and I am so grateful you stayed with me until the end. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you cozy in your bed, on your commute, or maybe taking a break at work? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is in the world. If you enjoyed seeing justice finally served, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story. Remember, you are the author of your own life. Don't let anyone else hold the pen. See you in the next video.